For centuries, an extraordinary war has raged across the world's oceans, above and below the waves.
You could kill hundreds of people with one broadside. These were extremely powerful war machines.
Shipbuilders designed bigger and faster vessels to outwit and crush their opponents.
That nation that has most powerful battleship fleet can destroy the enemy's battleship fleet and therefore control the seas. And if you control the seas, you control the world.
They carried terrifying weapons.
This was going to be the first time that somebody had fired a torpedo in anger since World War II. They needed to get it right.
But ships have also liberated and rescued thousands.
You can think of Gerda 3 as basically a lifeboat for persons hunted by the Nazis.
And inspired men and women to acts of incredible bravery.
I will take you there now, to your cannons, to your death. We will sink before surrender.
These vessels and their crews have shaped world history.
As the commanding officer of a missile-carrying submarine, I was directly responsible for helping to prevent World War III.
This time, how a single weapon caused a revolution on the seas.
The torpedo attack, a successful attack, that could turn a battle in minutes.
This terrifying technology brought with it the fastest combat ships ever seen.
If these things can engage their target, they can be murderously destructive.
A new form of combat made new heroes.
You thought, wow, you guys are really something.
And even an American icon. The 10th of June, 1918. It's the last few months of the First World War, and the Austro-Hungarian battleship St. István is in trouble off what is now Croatia's Dalmatian coast. Its sister ship alongside is powerless to help and can only capture the remarkable scene on camera. As the St. István lists heavily to starboard, many of the 1,000-strong crew abandon ship. Others turn the heavy guns to port in a vain attempt to balance the vessel. But the St. István is doomed. The mighty dreadnought capsized and then sank, with the loss of 89 lives. Of all the many naval losses of the First World War, this was the only battleship sinking to be caught on film. But the reason for the sinking is just as remarkable. The St. István was taken down by the terrifying new naval weapon of the era, the torpedo. A tiny Italian boat had slipped between the escort ships of the Austro-Hungarian Navy and approached the battleship. It fired just 2 torpedoes before escaping quickly. The torpedo and the torpedo boat, a double act that proved deadly across 2 world wars. Surprisingly, the origins of this new combat ship can be found on the genteel banks of the River Thames. 140 years ago, this spot in the London suburb of Chiswick was home to the flourishing shipyard business of John Thornycroft. He'd been shipbuilding since the age of 19 and specialised in fast and elegant steam launches, pleasure craft for the great and the good.
When Thornycroft was making his pleasure launches, these were things for sort of 6 or 8 people to travel up the river, so it was the enjoyment of speed.
But news of Thornycroft's particular skills spread overseas. In 1873, the Norwegian Navy tasked him with turning his sleek pleasure craft into something very different.
At the front of it, there was a 30-foot pole with an explosive canister on the front, and the intention was to ram into a major ship and blow it up at the waterline.
The earliest torpedoes were little more than naval mines, often delivered via a long spar. In 1864, just such a device had sunk a Union warship in the American Civil War. But already, Victorian inventors were developing a far more sophisticated weapon.
For decades, actually, people have had this idea that wouldn't it be great and wouldn't it be useful if you could make a weapon travel unseen, underwater, over a long distance, and fired from a relatively small and simple delivery system.
Italian Giovanni Lupis developed a basic design, but it was only when he was introduced to English engineer Robert Whitehead in 1864 that the torpedo as we know it became reality.
Lupis has invented the world's first self-propelled torpedo, which is an explosive charge that can move underwater. But his design is really pretty much theoretical. It's not a very practical application. Whitehead is an engineer, and he takes this technology and he makes it practical. He develops an actual working weapon.
All torpedoes consist of three main components: a warhead containing an explosive charge, a propulsion system, which in early torpedoes was steam or compressed air, and finally, devices to keep the weapon stable and going in the right direction. Even though the torpedo's designer was British, the Royal Navy was slow to see its potential. Other nations, on the other hand, didn't hold back, keen to get their hands on a weapon that for a while was simply called a Whitehead.
It allows a smaller navy from perhaps a smaller, poorer country to punch above its weight, because you can basically take this several £100s worth of weapon, put it on a small craft that maybe cost a few thousand, and if you get everything right, you can destroy a battleship that's cost hundreds of thousands or millions of pounds.
In 1875, the Royal Navy did eventually contact John Thornycroft at his Chiswick boatyard. Like the Norwegians, they wanted a small, fast new vessel, one that was adapted to launch the new self-propelled torpedoes and become the first true torpedo boat, HMS Lightning.
Thornycroft sold his boats to pretty well all the navies of Europe. There were no restrictions in those days. So all the major navies bought Thornycroft's torpedo boats, and they all needed them.
And these boats start to be built in greater and greater numbers. At first, they have really a fleet of experiments. Every single one is different to the one that went before it.
So what Thornycroft was doing was testing all the time. The last boats they were building here could go to 30 knots, which is absolutely astonishing. The nearest modern parallel is Formula One cars.
By the start of the First World War, the proliferation of torpedo boats was so great that navies were adapting to the new threat.
The only real sure defence against the torpedo in the First World War is to sink the thing that's firing it, to sink the delivery system.
But that wasn't easy to achieve. HMS Caroline is a light cruiser launched in 1914. She was well armed and had torpedoes of her own. One of her roles was to target enemy torpedo boats.
Caroline would have to turn broadside onto her target. Torpedo tubes would then be swung outboard, and then they would be fired on the orders actually of the officer on the spot who's in command of that torpedo mount.
But cruisers like Caroline were simply too large and slow to keep pace with tiny torpedo boats. Luckily, the British, with the expertise of Thornycroft, had invented a whole new class of vessel: the torpedo boat destroyer.
It could carry torpedoes, also carry heavy guns. It could travel at a speed faster than existing torpedo boats. It carried a complement of 40 men and officers. These were substantial craft, and they worked. And the irony, of course, is that Thornycroft now had a fantastic business. They were building torpedo boats, and they were building torpedo boat destroyers.
Over the years, this new class of warship became known simply as a destroyer, a key part of navies all around the globe. The workers at Thornycroft's could never have imagined their revolutionary vessel would have such a future.
The purpose of the destroyer remains pretty much unchanged from the early torpedo boat destroyers of the First World War through to the years after the Second World War. But they get bigger and faster and better equipped and better armed and more capable at doing their job. They can deliver torpedo attacks, they can fend off attacks by enemy torpedo carrying craft, they can search for and sink submarines, they can provide defence against aircraft. They are formidable.
But destroyers weren't the only ships evolving. So too were torpedo boats. For the Second World War, the Germans developed a vessel that terrorized the Royal Navy.
This boat is almost designed like a knife. This is like the German equivalent of the Spitfire in terms of the war at sea.
The invention of the self-propelled torpedo caused a revolution in ship design in the late 1800s. Navies needed new vessels to fire them, and new vessels to defend against them. At the start of the First World War, Germany ordered 48 new ocean-going torpedo boats. These, they believed, could wreck an enemy fleet. The Royal Navy, meanwhile, built torpedo boat destroyers, but still feared the German threat.
Admiral Sir John Jellicoe, who's in charge of the Royal Navy's Grand Fleet, even before the war breaks out, he is on the record as saying, if I see the enemy about to launch a torpedo attack, even if I see the enemy fleet turn away from me, I will assume that they're planning a torpedo attack and I will turn away from them. Because a torpedo attack, a successful attack by swarms of torpedo boats, that could turn a battle in minutes if any of those torpedoes strike home.
Jellicoe's fears came true on May 31st, 1916. The German and British fleets clashed in the biggest naval battle of the war, the Battle of Jutland.
There is one particular moment where the torpedo has a dramatic effect on the course of the battle. With the German fleet in trouble, outnumbered and trying to get home, Admiral Scheer sends his torpedo boats forward, and these 60-odd torpedo boats all come at the British. Admiral Jellicoe, he turns his fleet away from the German torpedo boats, which launch off their torpedoes, and I think only one hits its target. But the key point is Scheer is able to get his fleet away into the mist and the darkness and ultimately gets his fleet home. And this provokes decades of argument within the Royal Navy about whether Jellicoe was right to make this decision.
The years between the wars would see torpedo boats become ever more fearsome. Steam-driven turbine engines were replaced with more powerful petrol engines. Once again, it was the Germans who led the way. A quiet boatyard in Cornwall is the unlikely place to find a cutting-edge Nazi killing machine. S-130 is a German motor torpedo boat from 1943, better known as an S-boat. Having fallen into British hands at the end of the war, she's currently undergoing a full restoration. Since the First World War, the size and power of the German Navy had been strictly controlled by international regulations. So the Germans went back to basics, building small and simple vessels that concealed their true nature.
It's a wooden motor launch, at least that's the way it appears in terms of international law, but it's a wooden motor launch that packs an enormous punch with a torpedo that can sink a battleship.
S-boat is short for Schnellboot, quite literally, fast boat. They were built to get amongst enemy targets, fire their torpedoes, and make a rapid exit.
This boat is almost designed like a knife. It's there to cut through the water. What's striking about this is you've got technology here in terms of a wooden boat that the Vikings would recognise. The combination of very old-fashioned wooden technology, together with the latest in terms of German engineering. But in the midst of it, you've got this internal skeleton made out of aluminium, which will reinforce the wood. And at the heart of it, you've got these big 3 marine diesels, Mercedes-Benz diesels. Each one is the size of a small compact family car, which will power this thing through the water at 44 to 45 knots.
Despite weighing 100 tons fully loaded, the S-boats were faster than any of the Allies' torpedo boats.
And here's one of the propellers. A beautiful piece of work. 3 of these driving through the water. Each one very, very finely tuned. So those engines are driving these 3 propellers, each one a beautiful work of art, and that's what's pushing this thing through the water, literally at a rate of knots. This is like the German equivalent of the Spitfire in terms of the war at sea.
The restoration of the S-boat has revealed the centuries-old craftsmanship of the German shipbuilders.
Look at each one of these. It's beautifully cut.
But it's also revealed the wartime pressures the shipyards were under.
You begin to see the problems that they're having, where you find different size screws, because they've run out of the right size screw for the particular job, so they go to the screw which is the next size up. It tells you something about the German war economy. It says, hey, we're running short of materials here. We're not getting the stuff that we really want.
So how successful were these sleek, sophisticated killing machines? One key German tactic was to disrupt British supply lines. Atlantic convoys could be picked off by submarines. But the convoys that hugged the shallow waters of the British coastline were harder to attack.
Those convoys are carrying typically things like the coal, which is essential to keep the lights burning in London. You stop the coastal convoys, you bring the British war economy to its knees.
When France fell in 1940, the S-boat became the perfect boat for the job. Operating from French channel ports, they could create havoc all along the English coast.
That's where these things are so deadly, because they can come from their lairs at night, they can sit there, they can wait for the coastal convoys.
The S-boats had a tactic known as stitch and sats, or random approach. They would head towards an enemy convoy in a line. 10 miles off, they would split into pairs, spaced 2 miles apart. Then they would simply wait for the convoy to sail past. For more than 2 years, the German S-boats held the upper hand in the English Channel, picking off convoys almost at will.
To give you an idea of the potency of the S-boats, late 1942, off the Eddystone Light, which isn't actually far from where we are today, German S-boats sink during the course of a few minutes 3 merchant ships, an armed trawler, which is there for their defence. Over 30 seamen lose their lives. If these things can engage their target, the coastal convoys, they can be murderously destructive. That's where the torpedo tube would sit, one each side of the boat. And immediately behind it, a little way further down the deck, that's where the reloads would sit. So in other words, you could fire off one torpedo, then you could bring up the reload, ease it into the tube, you'd be ready to go again. Those torpedoes would still sink any ship today. Those cannon inflict damage even on a ship today. So this thing, even though it's 70 years old, still has got a lot of formidable potency about it. Even though we see it here in kind of a restoration state, this thing oozes power, oozes authority.
By mid-1943, the Germans were preparing for what they believed was inevitable: an Allied invasion of Europe. The S-boat would now prove its adaptability. The terror of the British coastline would become the first line of defence for the French coast.
As the war has begun to tip in the balance, these things then become perhaps your primary means to delay or to stop the Allied invasion. They want these things to intercept the Allies and hopefully to do sufficient damage to give the German army a chance at the waterfront.
In April 1944, the German S-boats did inflict a blow to Allied invasion plans.
For a long time it was kept secret because the fear was, boy, this will not be good for morale.
After 40 years, it took one man's tenacity to uncover the truth.
And I never forget once a veteran saying to my dad, "Ken Small, I owe you everything." And my dad said, "No, I owe you everything."
The beautiful southwest coast of England is an unlikely theatre of conflict. But 4 years into the Second World War, the people of Slapton in Devon were moved from their homes so that military exercises could take place. The truth of what happened during those exercises remained a mystery for 40 years. In the 1970s, Ken Small was running a local guest house. In his spare time, he would go beachcombing. He often found coins and jewellery. But at Slapton, his finds were more sinister.
He had this huge container where he would literally put hundreds almost of pieces of shrapnel, and they would just go into the bucket along with bullet heads, bullet cases, etc. But every now and then he might find an ID bracelet with a name on it. And the names sometimes, were typically American. When you find bullet cases, bullet heads, it's not so personal. When you find rings, tunic buttons, belt buckles, ID bracelets, things like that, then it becomes more real.
Ken suspected that the training exercises of the 1940s had gone terribly wrong. But little did he realise he was uncovering one of the greatest secrets of the Second World War, an Allied disaster caused by the much-feared German S-boats. Ken talked about his beach finds to local fisherman Tony Steer. He too had discovered something he couldn't account for.
Tony explained that there was this object at sea in an area of the seabed where there wasn't any rocks. And my dad just said, well, surely, aren't you curious? Don't you want to know what it is? Eventually, my dad persuaded him to put on some diving equipment because Tony was a diver, and he dived down to look. And that's when he came up and said to my dad, "You're not going to believe this, it's a Sherman tank."
In 1974, Ken paid the US government $50 for the rights to the tank. A whole 10 years later, with the press and public watching, the tank was raised from the seabed and brought ashore. As news of Ken's extraordinary discovery spread across the world, those involved in the mysterious military exercises felt able to speak out for the first time.
The key turning point was the tank. Once it came up, that's when many of the veterans thought, well, hey, this is out now, maybe I should speak of it.
After 40 years of secrecy, it emerged that the tank had been involved in a massive 9-day rehearsal for the D-Day landings, known as Exercise Tiger. It involved over 30,000 American troops. Slapton Sands was chosen because it resembled the beach in Normandy the Americans would come to call Utah Beach.
They filled up in the transports at Portsmouth, sent them out to sea, and the order was to go far enough out into the channel so that it would duplicate the time it would take to cross the channel, so that as you are coming in just before dawn, it will feel just like a landing in Normandy. We want to make this as realistic as possible.
But Exercise Tiger was about to become more realistic than anyone imagined, because German intelligence had picked up a mass of radio signals in the Devon area.
You don't have to break codes to realise the kind of noise that a convoy makes at sea as signals are being exchanged with land stations. So you might not know what's actually being said, you might not know what's actually at sea, but you know something's at sea because signals are being exchanged. The German radio service intercepts those signals and basically says to the 5th and 9th S-Bloke flotillas in Cherbourg, there's something out there, go and find out what it is.
In the early hours of the 28th of April, German S-boats arrived off the coast of Devon. Amongst them, the formidable S-130. What the S-boats found was an inviting target. 8 tank landing ships were heading in a line towards the beach escorted by the Royal Navy. The S-boats swiftly adopted the Stitch-and-Sats tactic and moved in for a torpedo attack. For thousands of American troops, the D-Day rehearsal was about to become very real.
And when German torpedoes from the S-boats begin to hit those tank landing ships, it sets on fire some of the fuel in the petrol tanks of the vehicles which are there on the vehicle decks, and it's carnage.
Our signalman was on the stern with the rest of them, and he said to me, "I'm not going to jump in that cold water," and pointing to the fire and explosions behind us. I said, "Well, make your choice. You're either going to burn to death on the ship or freeze to death in the sea." That was the last I saw of him.
Some soldiers and sailors die in the initial explosion, some drown trapped in the hull, some are burnt to death, some are killed as they go over the side.
We got past the burning water, the dead, and the people yelling for help, and we floated by this officer who told me to save my breath, stop screaming for help like the rest of them, because nobody was going to help us.
What those men went through that night was unimaginable hell.
Finally, coming under heavy fire themselves, the S-boats turned and headed back across the channel. But with over 700 servicemen left dead or dying, the Utah Beach rehearsal proved far more costly to the Americans than the real Utah Beach invasion some 5.5 weeks later. Fortunately for the Allies, the Germans never realized the significance of the exercise they'd stumbled upon. D-Day remained a secret, and the survivors of the S-boat torpedo attack were ordered to keep the disaster to themselves.
For a long time it was kept secret because the fear was, this will not be good for morale for the invading troops or for political support from back home.
An official secret turned into a silence that lingered for 40 years, until Ken Small's Sherman tank became a belated memorial to those who lost their lives at Slapton Sands.
Pretty well everyone involved, especially the families now, they're forever saying to me, "Dean, we owe your dad a debt of gratitude." And I never forget once a veteran saying to my dad, "Ken Small, I owe you everything." And my dad said, "No, I owe you everything."
The German S-boats were feared, and with good reason. But they weren't entirely unmatched. At the outbreak of the Second World War, the German Navy had over 60 motor torpedo boats. The Royal Navy had just 3. But the few they had were revolutionary. And the very first of them was Motor Torpedo Boat 102. MTB 102 was the brainchild of the Vosper Shipbuilding Company. Her sleek design and firepower proved a hit, and the Royal Navy's MTB fleet expanded swiftly from 3 to 60.
This was the first small boat to carry 2 21-inch torpedoes. Previously they'd been 18-inch torpedoes. They were fired on the small craft by an explosive charge, like a big gun in effect, but they just fell out of the end of the barrel and flopped in the water and off they went. Inside them they had a little diesel engine and they ran at somewhere around 40 knots and they had a range of about 5,000 yards.
But it wasn't just the weapons system that made this vessel unique. The designer, Peter Duquesne, was an aircraft pilot as well as a shipbuilder. By streamlining the boat's hull, just as you would a plane's fuselage, he increased the speed by 10 knots. Armed with torpedoes and depth charges, the motor torpedo boat fleet was designed to combat warships and submarines. Their giveaway name, though, was kept under wraps. As far as the Germans were concerned, they were simply CMBs, coastal motorboats. Of all the MTBs, 102 is undoubtedly the most celebrated. It served throughout the war and has the unique claim of being the smallest vessel ever to serve as a Royal Navy flagship. In spring 1940, the mass evacuation of troops from Dunkirk was being overseen from the destroyer HMS Keith. But on the 1st of June, the Keith was bombed by the Luftwaffe and had to be abandoned.
Admiral Wake Walker, who was on board Keith and in command at sea, then transferred his staff to the nearest naval vessel, which happened to be MTB 102.
A flagship needs an admiral's flag. The torpedo boat didn't have one, so they improvised.
The crew actually made an admiral's flag from an Admiralty issue dishcloth, which is an off-white square dishcloth with a red line woven through the middle of it. They then painted in the other half of the Red Cross, which then gives you the flag of Admiralty, and 2 balls on it to show there was a rear admiral on board. So for the last 3 days of the Dunkirk evacuation, 102 was tearing in and out of Dunkirk harbour with the Admiralty dishcloth at the masthead.
Another brush with history came 4 years later, when the tiny 102 carried Winston Churchill and General Eisenhower around the Solent, inspecting the ships assembled for D-Day. The very first British motor torpedo boat is now the last still operational.
She is an absolutely fantastic vessel. It's just amazing that one small ship could have done so much in its lifetime. I think you can smell it when you go down below. It's absolutely incredible. I still personally can't come to terms with what this boat has been through in its history.
MTB 102 deserves its legendary reputation. But it's not the most famous torpedo boat. That accolade goes to a vessel from across the pond.
PT-109 is cut in half. The wreckage is on fire. They're sitting targets for Japanese aircraft.
The story of this one boat was enough to forge the career of a 20th century icon. On January 20th, 1961, a motor torpedo boat became an unlikely star at one of the world's great spectacles, the inauguration of a US president. John F. Kennedy had just become the most powerful man on the planet, but 18 years earlier, he'd made his name in the Pacific as a Second World War patrol torpedo boat skipper. PT boats, as they were known, had proved a real hit with the American public.
But I'd like you to meet the real sweetheart of the Navy, 1944 model.
You mean me?
No, not you, Red. I mean her.
And I got to tell you, a lot of people thought that was a very glamorous thing to be in, was the PT boats, especially sailors that were on big ships. They thought, wow, you guys are really something.
For a young Jack Kennedy, his exploits in PT boats turned him into a war hero and helped him on his way to the White House. The boats were light, they were fast, and they packed a lethal punch. In the Pacific, the PT boats proved to be small and deadly. The Japanese took to calling them mosquitoes.
Out of 434 PT boats in the Pacific theater, they sank 1,200 vessels in 47 aircraft. Early on, they would carry 4 torpedoes and torpedo tubes. The torpedoes had a warhead with a 600-pound explosive charge in there, capable of sinking large ships.
PT boats bristled with weapons. They had twin 50 caliber machine guns, originally designed to be used in aircraft.
They had a very high rate of fire, and they were very effective. On a PT boat, everything was kept simple. This gun turret was all manually operated. The gunner would push his back against this and use his feet actually to rotate this gun on roller bearings. Because it was such a small vessel and everyone on the crew had to cross-train, know a little bit about each other's jobs in case someone was wounded or injured in battle, and sometimes they had to trade off.
I was the radar operator, and I also manned the 20-millimeter gun. My job was stand by as a cook too when our cook got sick.
The PT boat crews were fearless. When under attack from Japanese destroyers, they used a tactic that was ingenious, but almost suicidal.
They would pull right alongside the destroyer where the guns couldn't depress enough to shoot at the torpedo boat and fire back at the searchlights, cause confusion, and then they could retreat.
But for all their impressive firepower and glamour, PT boats had a number of weaknesses. Their torpedoes sometimes failed to leave the tube.
With no resistance or cooling from the seawater, the turbines in the torpedo would overheat and blow apart.
Even if the torpedoes did fire properly, the explosive charge could reveal the boat's position to the enemy.
It could give off a flash of light, which would give their location off at night. Also, the grease in the tube could ignite and burn for even 5 seconds, was a huge signal for the enemy ship to home in on the PT boat.
Life on a PT boat was unlike any other in the US Navy, and the crews developed ways to cope with the danger they faced.
You know, you used to play a game with cards. You deal the cards out, turn them over. Whoever got the lowest card was going to get killed that night. That's how we played it. Put it this way, I would have preferred to be where I was than on a carrier where you had 2,500 men, and the only guy you knew was the guy you slept next to. We were a very close group, very, we had a lot of fun with each other. You know, we really took good care of each other.
The excitement of the PT boats appealed to the young John F. Kennedy. At the age of 26, he was in the Pacific, commanding PT 109, part of a torpedo boat squadron based on Wendover, one of the Solomon Islands. By early 1943, the Americans were pushing the Japanese out of the region. The PT's job was to stop Japanese destroyers supplying their remaining troops on the Solomons. JFK was anxious to prove himself, if only to shake off the reputation of his father, Joseph Kennedy, the former US ambassador to London.
Kennedy wanted to serve in World War II because his father had a reputation as a defeatist and as an appeaser. And Kennedy wanted to prove that he could live that down. In his words, he didn't want to wear cowards' tweeds.
Kennedy's moment came at the end of July 1943, when intelligence informed his base that a group of Japanese destroyers was approaching the Solomon Islands. 15 PTs were sent out in one of the largest operations of the Solomon Islands campaign.
They find the destroyers rather earlier than they expected because they were at least an hour ahead of schedule. And at that point, all hell broke loose.
The American boats fire torpedoes at the Japanese, but they all miss. On board PT 109, Kennedy and his lookout spot a destroyer coming at them. Its course will split their boat in two.
He tried to turn to a 30-degree angle to launch a torpedo attack. But before he had time to even maneuver fully, the destroyer was right on top of them and came right alongside, just forward of the torpedo tube, and cut into the boat, went right along downside the boat. Marnie, who was in the gun turret, was killed on impact, and the destroyer went right down the side of the boat. Midship hit the fuel tank and ignited the fuel. And you can imagine the impact of a destroyer over 2,000 tons hitting an 80-foot wooden boat.
PT 109 is cut in half, the wreckage is on fire, the men are scattered around in this aviation-fueled sea around them. They're sitting targets for Japanese aircraft. And so they have to find some way of getting onto this wreckage. And that wreckage will only last a certain time before it goes under. And the one thing, of course, they are expecting is that there will be a search for them by the remaining PT boats. And there never is. And it's one of the things Kennedy was, in retrospect, extremely bitter about. As late as 1960, he met someone from one of the other boats in a lift at the Democratic Convention. And when the man introduced himself, all Kennedy could say to him was, "Where were you?"
No search party was sent for the crew of PT 109. They were all believed to be dead. In fact, for 9 hours, the 11 survivors clung to what was left of the hull. With no sign of a rescue, they decided to swim towards a distant island. Kennedy grabbed the strap of an injured crew member's life jacket, bit it with his teeth, and pulled the man through shark-infested water to safety. He swam for 4 hours. For the next few days, the crew swam from island to island, looking for coconuts and drinking water. When they found a native islander, Kennedy carved a message on a coconut for him to take to the Allied forces. Native knows posit. He can pilot. 11 alive. Need small boat. Kennedy. 7 days after being shipwrecked, they were finally rescued by a PT boat. Kennedy returned home a hero.
He won the Naval Marine Medal. He won the Purple Heart. He was lucky in the sense that the PT-157 that came to rescue them had 2 embedded war correspondents there. And so they reported the story, and once it got through the naval censors, it became headline news.
PT-109 has become part of the JFK mythology. It freed him from his father's shadow and set him on a path to the White House. A decision was made to redecorate a surviving PT boat for his inauguration day in January 1961. PT-109 returned on the streets of Washington.
Kennedy's service on the PT-109 is what enables him to have a political career in appealing to the greatest generation in America, the people who served in World War II, and they become a crucial part of post-war politics. And Kennedy has this in with them because of this genuine record of heroism.
The coconut carved 8,000 miles away in the Solomon Islands had been returned to Kennedy. He placed it on his desk in the Oval Office. The Second World War was undoubtedly the high point of the torpedo boat. They were fast, feared, and even glamorous. But in 1945, that daredevil age, acted out in small wooden combat ships, drew to a close. Torpedoes would be joined by missile technology. Weapons and their warships would now enter the nuclear age.